Hi, and welcome to the third installation of the Pelvic Empowerment Overactive Bladder series. I'm Tori, and I am a doctor of physical therapy who specializes in pelvic dysfunction, which means I treat things that can go wrong around the pelvis, and this includes bladder dysfunction. If you haven't, please do check out the previous two videos in this series, as these videos are the most effective if they are viewed in order. And this video assumes that you've kept a bladder diary for at least 3 days and that you're ready to review your results together and figure out which bladder retraining strategies are going to be the most effective for you. As always, timestamps and links to any studies or resources mentioned today can be found in the description below. And without further ado, let's get into it. So there are 6 main areas of interest when it comes to interpreting the results of a bladder diary. We want to pay close attention to the amount of total fluid intake versus the amount of total urine output, overall hydration, just in case peeing, potential activity triggers, potential dietary triggers, and potential pharmaceutical triggers. So let's go ahead and start by examining the total fluid intake versus the total urine output. So the normal range of urine output compared to fluid intake does differ depending on your source. However, what's usually considered normal is if the urine output is anywhere from 40 to 100% of the amount of total fluid intake. Said another way, if you drink 2 liters or 2,000 milliliters of fluid in a day, you should expel anywhere from 800 to 2,000 milliliters of urine that day. I mentioned in the very first video in this series that sometimes bladder urgency frequency can be caused by underlying conditions. If you notice that your fluid intake to urine output ratio is either way lower or way higher than what's expected, please do go see a physician. These results can be indicative of diabetes, prostate issues, thyroid issues, and other health conditions that may need medical attention. Okay, hopefully your urine output to fluid intake ratio is well within normal limits, and we can move on to our next topic of interest, overall hydration. So of course water is the most ideal fluid for you. However, when it comes to calculating fluid intake through the lens of hydration, the only fluid that we know without a shadow of a doubt to be dehydrating is alcohol. Other non-alcoholic fluids like caffeinated and decaf coffee and tea, as well as fruit juices, do have good evidence to suggest that while they may irritate some people's bladders, that they are in fact hydrating. Said another way, if you only drink coffee all day long, it might irritate your bladder and increase your urgency frequency for that reason, but you're probably hydrated as long as you're drinking enough of it. So let's take a look at how much hydrating fluid you're drinking in a day before we talk more about how hydration relates to urgency frequency. Go ahead and take a look at your 3-day bladder diary, and this time in the drink section, only add up the total volume of alcoholic beverages you drink per day. Once you have that number, subtract it from your total fluid input that day to figure out how much hydrating fluid you're drinking. Do this for each of the 3 days, and then take the average of those 3 days to find the number that we are interested in. Now, we are often told that we should drink 6 to 8 8-ounce glasses of water or another hydrating fluid each day. However, I do not think that this is always the case. I believe that there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all notion in any part of health, and I do not think that bladder health is an exception. Rather than telling you to drink however many glasses of water each day, I like considering your weight, where you live, and how active you are when it comes to determining how much hydrating fluid you should be drinking. drinking. My favorite equation for this essentially says that you should drink a half to full ounce of water or hydrating fluid for every pound that you weigh, and that your location and activity level impact where you fall in that range. For example, I weigh 140 pounds, which means I should drink 70 to 140 ounces of water in a day. If I live in a hot climate or at high elevation, or if I'm very active, I should probably aim for the higher end of that range, for closer to 140 ounces or so. If I live in a colder climate, on the other hand, or am very sedentary, I can probably aim for the lower end of that range, for 70 ounces or so. Take a second to compare the average amount of hydrating fluid you drank over the course of 3 days to the range of hydrating fluid you should be drinking. If you're drinking too much, that could be one of the main causes of your urgency frequency. I remember once treating a patient who weighed all of 100 pounds, who was pretty active, but was drinking 4 to 5 liters or 135 to 170 ounces of water every day. We cut down her water intake to like 2 to 3 liters or 65 to 100 ounces of water every day, and her urgency frequency resolved. On the other side of that coin, if you aren't drinking enough, it's important to understand that while it may be counterintuitive, dehydration will actually make your urgency frequency worse. Some people will purposefully minimize or even avoid fluid intake in hopes of bettering their urgency frequency, and even though that is a totally human and understandable response, it will have the opposite effect. Here's why. Recall our bladder from the first installation of this series. Urine enters the bladder through the ureters, which are the tubes that connect the bladder to the kidneys. Your kidneys are incredible organs that constantly filtrate your blood and process its waste products, which exit the kidneys through the ureters as urine. Healthy, hydrated urine is mostly water. Water dilutes these waste products. However, even if you don't drink a lot of fluid, your kidneys are still going to filtrate your blood and create urine. That urine will just be more and more concentrated. And we know that concentrated urine can irritate the bladder and increase urgency, frequency, and urge incontinence, not to mention the other negative effects of dehydration. So if your numbers indicate that you aren't drinking enough hydrating fluid, it's time to up your fluid intake to somewhere within your range that makes the most sense for you. If you aren't sure whether or not you're drinking enough, start paying attention to the color and smell of your urine. Hydrated urine is clear or really light yellow, and it really isn't very smelly at all, whereas dehydrated urine is going to be a much darker yellow and is going to be a lot smellier. So with this understanding of how much water you should be drinking every day, let's talk a little bit more about how you should be drinking it. Sometimes, especially if someone is just beginning to up their fluid intake, they will drink a lot of water all at once in order to meet their new goal. However, it is much easier on your bladder if you space out your fluid intake throughout the day. So if you're someone who chugs, commit to slow, spaced out fluid intake throughout the day, at least for the duration of your healing. Once you're on the other side of your healing experience, you can always try chugging again. You might be able to tolerate it better later, but until then, do everything that you can to optimize your healing environment, including spacing out your fluid intake. All right, now that we have thoroughly discussed hydration, let's talk about just in case peeing. So go ahead and check out your bladder diary again, and what you're looking for now is times that you peed when you had little to no urge, maybe a 0 or a level 1 urge. Usually when someone pees when they have little to no urge, they're peeing just in case. Just in case peeing is a bad bladder habit, it, and it reinforces urgency frequency because, as we discussed in the first video in this series, the walls of the bladder are lined with receptors that sense the bladder stretching as it fills with urine. And those receptors tell your brain, via bladder contractions, how full your bladder is and when it's time to urinate. And when you empty your bladder over and over and over again, when it isn't that full, just in case, you can train those receptors to eventually send really urgent messages to your brain when they shouldn't be, when your bladder really isn't that full. Understanding why peeing just in case is a bad bladder habit and why you shouldn't do it is helpful, but how do you actually train yourself to stop? Well, first you need to identify when and why you're doing it. Hopefully you either intuitively know why you're just in case peeing, and if you don't, hopefully you wrote down in the notes section of your bladder diary what you were doing when you acted on very small or no urges at all. Sometimes people will just in case pee before a work meeting. Sometimes people will do it before they run errands, before they leave the house. Other times people will do it before they start a demanding activity. Whatever the reason, figuring out what the trigger is really helpful. Once you know when and why you're just in case peeing, actively try to stop surrounding activities at home first, where it's safer if you have an accident. And once you gain confidence surrounding those home activities, bring that confidence with you out into public spaces. Just in case peeing tends to get better by becoming aware of it, by implementing the other strategies that we've discussed and will continue to discuss in this video, and by using urge suppression techniques and implementing proper behavior on the way to the toilet and sitting properly on the toilet when you pee, both of which we will discuss in upcoming videos in this series. Next, let's discuss activity triggers. As I've mentioned, the bladder is a trainable organ, and sometimes someone will accidentally train their bladder to have a really intense urge response to a specific activity. This is known as key in the door urgency, aptly named because sometimes someone can have a really strong urge right when they get home and they're putting the key in the door to unlock their front door. You may already intuitively be aware of your activity triggers if you have them. Common activity triggers other than key in the door urgency include seeing a bathroom, hearing the sound of water, and even arriving to a new location. If you aren't sure, scan your bladder diary for level 3 urges that have a star next to them. We talked about documenting when level 3 urges come out of seemingly nowhere and writing down what you were up to when that happened. Hopefully you can see a pattern in those seemingly random urges and identify activity triggers associated with them if you have them. How do you treat activity triggers? With urge suppression techniques. For now, write down your activity triggers, let yourself become aware of them, be kind to yourself surrounding them, and bring them with you to the next video in this series where we will discuss in detail how to use urge suppression techniques to eliminate activity triggers. Let's move into our second to last topic of interest today, dietary triggers. Before we talk more about this subject, I want to make a couple of things very clear. It is not my intention to tell you to never drink coffee again for the rest of your life or to never eat your favorite food. That's not realistic, and it's an oversimplification of the issue at hand. I think. If I had urgency frequency and someone told me to never drink coffee again, I wouldn't do it, so I don't expect you to do that. What I do expect is for you to become aware of your dietary triggers, if you have them, and then decide how you want to integrate that information into your healing now and into your life once you've fully healed. If it were me, just going off of how I've behaved when healing my own chronic conditions in the past, I would probably want to identify my triggers, eliminate them for a defined period of time, probably 8 to 12 weeks just to optimize my body's healing environment during the healing process, and then reintroduce them when I'm better. That's what I did with acidic foods when I was healing my chronic heartburn. That's what I'm doing with certain provocative activities during my healing experience right now, and that's probably what I would do with dietary triggers if I were healing urgency frequency. You don't have to do that, but if you choose not to, you need to own that decision and make peace with the fact that you may be able to heal more and faster if you did. And if you do choose to do that, and then you start to reintroduce those triggers on the other side of your healing, you may realize that while you're much better able to tolerate certain triggers that you couldn't before, there are still certain foods or beverages that irritate you. And that's okay. You just need to prepare for that response if you're going to eat or drink that specific trigger. For example, even though I can eat almost anything nowadays without getting heartburn, there are still certain candies that will trigger my acid reflux. So if I'm going to eat one of those candies, I make sure that I have Pepcid on hand to treat my incoming heartburn. So with that being said, let's talk more about dietary triggers. Dietary triggers exist on a spectrum where some people aren't sensitive to them at all, some people are very sensitive to them, and some people are only sensitive if they're exposed to a certain amount. And only you can figure out where you fall on that spectrum. The most common dietary triggers include caffeine. Caffeine does have a natural diuretic effect, which can increase frequency in some of us. However, it also has an excitatory effect on the muscles that surround the bladder. And you may recall that when you feel urgency, when you have an urge to urinate, you're actually feeling that bladder muscle contract. So caffeine's excitatory effect, caffeine's stimulation of that muscle can also increase urgency in some of us. So caffeinated foods like chocolate and caffeinated beverages like coffee and tea can be irritating to some people's bladders. But again, these things exist on a spectrum. Dark chocolate has more caffeine than milk chocolate, which has more caffeine than white chocolate. So even if you can't tolerate dark chocolate, you might be able to tolerate white chocolate. Through that same lens, coffee has more caffeine and is more acidic than black tea, which has more caffeine than green tea. I want to encourage you to enter into the world of dietary triggers with curiosity, remembering that there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all statement about bladder irritants, and that at the end of the day, only you can figure out where your limits are. Try to embrace trial and error in this space and see it as an opportunity to better get to know and understand your body and your bladder. All right, next on our list, we have carbonated beverages. Carbonated beverages like seltzer and soda can also irritate some people's bladders, and we think that's because the carbon dioxide is irritating to the inner lining of the bladder, but we aren't exactly sure why. Alcohol is another very well-known bladder irritant. It has a diuretic effect, which can increase frequency, and it is absolutely 100% dehydrating. It has a direct effect on the kidneys that you can learn more about if you Google vasopressin and alcohol, but for now, trust me when I say that even one serving can still dehydrate you, and that can increase urgency. That dehydrating effect makes your urine more acidic, which is going to increase the risk of urgency, and depending on the type of alcohol, the alcohol can be bubbly and have that carbonated effect, and alcohol can also be acidic. So we've got the potential for a triple whammy of carbonated, acidic, dehydrating beverage. But again, alcohol does exist on a spectrum. Red wine tends to be a lot more acidic and more irritating than white wine. Spirits with higher alcoholic concentrations tend to be more aggravating than spirits like vodka and gin. in. And it's also important to consider what kind of mixer you're using with your spirits. Moving on to foods, acid and spice are the most common dietary triggers found in foods. So foods with higher acidic concentrations like the citric acid in lemons, limes, oranges, and tomatoes and their juices, or the higher level of acid in vinegar and soy sauce and pickles, or the spicier spices like the red chili flakes that can sometimes be found in chili, or even the peppers that can sometimes be found in salsa, could all potentially be bladder irritants. Finally, we do have good evidence to suggest that some artificial sweeteners, specifically aspartame and saccharine, can irritate some people's bladders. These ingredients are sometimes found in diet soda, in sugar-free ice cream or sugar-free gum, and even in some breakfast cereals. So if you're noticing an increase in your urgency frequency after eating a seemingly non-acidic, non-alcoholic, non-caffeinated, not spicy thing, make sure to check the ingredients to see if maybe one of these artificial sweeteners could be the culprit. Again, this does not mean that you can never eat or drink anything on this list ever again. However, it might be worthwhile to study your bladder diary and see what you were eating and drinking maybe 30 to 90 minutes before those really high level urges occurred. Identifying your individual bladder irritants can be a really helpful tool moving forward, even if all you're doing is knowing that they irritate you and planning around that fact when you consume them. All right, let's briefly talk about our final topic, medications or pharmaceutical triggers. Medications can be trickier to identify as the culprit of your urgency frequency because sometimes their side effects build up slowly over time instead of happening all at once, and sometimes those side effects don't necessarily align with when you're taking your medication. So we have a couple of options when it comes to trying to identify medication as a potential trigger. One option is to find out whether or not any of the medications that you are taking have bladder irritation as a known side effect. I am going to walk you through a step-by-step process in the description below on how to use a helpful website, drugs.com, to help you identify whether or not bladder dysfunction is a known side effect of your medication. Another option is to attempt the other healing strategies first and see if your bladder responds. If you implement the other bladder retraining strategies that are relevant to you for 2 to 3 months and you don't notice any change, it might be time to start suspecting a medication. A third option is to try to create a timeline to try and remember when you started taking your medication and when your symptoms started happening. If your symptoms started before you started taking this medication, then you can probably rule it out as a potential trigger. However, if your symptoms started around the same time or soon after you started taking this medication, well then it might be worthy of further investigation. Finally, if you know that your medication is the culprit, do not hesitate to talk with your prescribing physician. Sometimes you can dose a medication differently and take smaller amounts throughout the day in order to better mitigate side effects. Other times you can change the time of day that you're taking the medication to make its side effects more manageable, and still other times you can replace that medication with a similar medication that doesn't have bladder dysfunction as a side effect. Whatever the options are, it's important to understand them, and you deserve to understand them through a conversation with your prescribing physician. All right, I hope that walking through your bladder diary together today was helpful. Whatever bladder strategies that you identify as being relevant content and helpful for you, it is very important to pair them with urge suppression techniques, proper behavior on the way to the toilet, and proper toilet positioning when you pee, all of which we will discuss in detail in the upcoming 2 videos in this series. On that note, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please do give it a thumbs up, and if you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down and let me know what I can do to improve my content in the future. Feel free to comment absolutely anything down below. Questions you have, feedback, content suggestions, anything really. I do try really hard to read and respond to all of my comments. Don't forget to check me out on Instagram, and finally, if you'd like to see more content from me, please do consider subscribing to the channel. I make videos about pelvic things like today's video, and I also make videos about life things. Thank you again so much for watching. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.